a slip stage is. Could you explain it to them?
So a slip stage is a deck on. It's a platform that slides side to side, and in my video at some point, I've got a demonstration.
Okay, so it's
one.
like a drum, like a really big drum platform that you roll out for the drummer.
So generally it's built so that you can't tell that it's something there, so it blends with the deck. So it slides side to side.
Very good. Sorry, as you were.
And so fun fact about golf carts is there's a dead man switch in the chair. So if you're not sitting down, it won't move. So we had
working correctly.
Yes.
So we had one performance where we had to stop because we couldn't move the slip stage for the last move. And it turned out because whatever they were doing to drive the golf cart, they weren't sitting down in the chair and triggering the dead man switch.
We actually had a parish priest when I was a kid who passed away because he was out playing golf and the net failed and the cart rolled towards an edge that it shouldn't have.
There's some really interesting things with turntables now that if you can't screw into the screw into the to the floor, you can build a big spider web structure and put the wheels pointing upwards. And then you can, and that way the weight of the turntable keeps it from moving around. And you can build a central pivot inside of there and have the turntable on top of those upward facing wheels and then turn the whole thing that way so that you can go into spaces where you can't drill or lag into the floor.
In high school we did a revolve where the center section here is a fixed platform, and then the outside section is a donut revolve that had stairs that went up on each side, and that was we just like pushed it around by hand.
Powered by stagehands.
Like Star Wars TNG and those doors. Come on, nobody called me on Star Wars TNG.
The Next Generation. Next Generation Star Wars.
Trek. The Next Gen. Oh, never mind.
I got it.
I thought you were doing a blanket statement.
And I was just on the stage at Paramount where the Enterprise bridge was. I should have known.
The TNG bridge?
No, the original Star Trek bridge.
I have a friend who built one in his garage.
Stage 60, no, not 63, 31 at Paramount Chris? Studios.
You mean his
loosely,
parents'
John.
garage?
Did you send his check this month?
Perfect, Jason. Because nobody who has their own Star Trek bridge in the garage has it in his own garage. It's definitely in your parents' garage.
I'm sorry.
Easily accessible from your parents' basement.
Hey, Bill, I need you to take the intro. I lost my camera.
Copy that. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. Our second hour is typically a deeper dive into something, and I'm really looking forward to today because today we have our theater folk with us. We are going to be talking about technical theater, how things happen backstage in the world of live performance. Should be a fascinating second hour, so we're all looking forward to that today. But now we are in our first hour, which means it's time to get to our regular questions. So I was going to be the reader until we just had a last-minute glitch here. Jason, can you read, or can somebody else?
Gladly, yeah. I'll take it over for
dive
you.
in.
Paul Wall, who's in Austin, Texas, writes in, what are some pointers in upgrading from Synergy 1 to the new Synergy 3 with the rebuilt GUI and auto discovery so I can combine more computers, increase disk space, and retire some keyboards and mice?
And John Preto is going to start off helping us out with that. John?
You threw me through a rabbit hole this morning, Paul. I started to upgrade. I downloaded the file whenever it came out about 2-3 weeks ago. Started the upgrade. You get through the whole upgrade, and it says, "Oh, we have a known issue that you can't install 3 over to top of 1, right?" And I was already logged into Office Hours, so I can't reboot. You have to go out and you have to delete the first version, and then you have to reboot your machine. Problem number 1. Problem number 2 is you have to pay for the license fee again. So for $30, you get to use it only on 3 computers. So I'll let you know after the show's over. I'll reboot and bring it back up, and we'll see how it goes. But it's been things are hard with Synergy.
I hope that took care of you, Paul. Let's move on to the next question.
Gladly. Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand writes in, hard to quantify this one, but I had failure of 4 things at once earlier whilst I was on after hours. My Hughes and Kettner amp went to 0 volume. My TV same. My Apple TV4 lost video, had to restore it. Mixer volumes way down, then all good. Thoughts? Solar flux?
Possibly. Tlaloc, any intelligence on this one?
You may have had some sort of brownout, and your voltage went down, and your power supplies were just really unhappy, and they either were unable to continue to provide power to your electronics, or they did it poorly.
Chris Fenwick.
Yeah, stable power. That's what I would say too. Something happened. I had an issue the other day where I thought my UPS, I thought I lost power. And after 2 days with an electrician, we found out that something went bad in my range hood, and it took out 3/4 of the power in my entire apartment. Like 5 of 8 AC outlets dead, half of the overhead lights dead, and it was something just in the range hood. So Peter, I'd check your range hood.
What were you cooking? Let's go to Alex Lindsay. Alex, you're back. So
Back. Sorry, everybody. Right before the show, my Sony camera just turned off. I got on early. It was working.
Wired to Peter's house.
It was connected to Peter's house. I'm sure. Exactly. That was it. I had one light, and my camera just turned off. I have no idea why. Anyway, so sorry about that. One thing to be very careful of, if you are getting brownouts, or if this happens again, you want to get a voltage regulator. So you want to get something now. Your UPSs sometimes will do that. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just passing voltage through. So if they're not producing a proper sine wave, or they're not pushing to the batteries, you're going to end up with just passing the bad voltage through to your devices. We deal with this a lot in Africa, where we have school, and we have a couple other things where we just kind of wear through our power supplies. And so this is where you really want a lot of external power supplies, because you have to replace them. But really what you want to do is condition that voltage. So if you're having that issue, if it's going up or down, it's going to slowly destroy your power supplies over time. So Furman also makes some good conditioners that you might want to take a look at. All right, next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada is up next. Converting a 2D midjourney image to a 3D object. Has anyone tried this method or other options? Warning, this might take over your weekend. And he's got a YouTube link there.
Yeah, so with what he's doing here, what he's showing in the video is just modeling it by hand, but inspired by Midjourney. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I was just playing with some logo ideas, and it's not that I'm going to use that logo that I'm building in Midjourney, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to build that all in 3D, or, if I like, what I'm working with, I'm going to rebuild that all and make it something that is built out of real geometry. The great thing about Midjourney is that you can get a lot of concepts. I was playing with the logo yesterday. I probably created 200 concepts in 10 minutes, that I could look at. And then from there, you can go through the trouble of actually building the model after you've already seen largely what you want it to look like. But that's going to give you explicit control. So it's still going to take time to do that. I think that most likely we are going to get to a point where that geometry can be generated by the AI as well. And then we'll be able to use it in whatever we'd like to. But right now, it's just it's a very good modeler doing hand modeling from something that he didn't have to come up with. And that's sometimes people are really good at modeling and not necessarily really great at concepts. And so Midjourney helps a lot with the concepts, and then they can just execute. So it's pretty cool. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. How would you cover an outdoor theater in a park? Audio, video, streaming?
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
So this is a it depends kind of question. We have so many outdoor venues, and the thing about it is that you change whether or not how should I put this? It changes a big amount depending on whether you're doing night versus in the daytime. If you're doing it in the daytime, bring lots of ND filters. And if you're doing it at night, test at night and get your levels and get your white balances for the lighting that you're dealing with, and work with your lighting designer to make sure that you can have an interesting look. You're going to white balance to your stage lighting, and then you're going to end up with really, really blue everywhere else. So think about how that works into your overall aesthetics. Be concerned about rain, be concerned about humidity, and be concerned about heat.
Go ahead, Bill.
Everything Tlaloc just said is what I've faced. I used to work in Phoenix mostly, and when you're outdoors shooting, you've got such a difficulty with sun because it can be so intense, and you can't control the direction it's coming from. Typically, when we're shooting, we use reflectors, large reflectors and things like that to try to balance somebody's face on stage with the background, which might be in direct sun and they might be in deep shadow. And that split in terms of range of contrast can be very difficult to work with for many cameras. So, but for a theater performance where you can't really bring in reflectors like that, it can be a challenge. So the first thing I do is get out my compass and try to figure out which direction the sun is going to be in at the time that I'm trying to shoot this outdoor performance, or hope that they have some kind of scrimming or something overhead, because the sun can be a real challenge in theater outdoors.
Yeah, we try to get away with silks, really large ones. And sometimes these will be 40, 50 feet long and 20 feet wide or even more. And if we can get away with, if they're okay with that and knowing what time of day you're going to do the event, it helps a lot to figure out where the sun's going to be. We once added a silk to a stage and the sun was literally coming the other direction. It was just coming the completely opposite direction. We were like, didn't think about that. So using sun models is really useful so that you know what time. There's a lot of them, Google Earth will do it, but you can also, there's some, I think it's called Sun Tracker or Sun Setter that we use so that we can go out and say, okay, what is it going to look like in the frame that I need it in? And then figuring out where those silks might be, or if that's not going to be useful. And a lot of times we try to build them into the design for the stage. So instead of trying to just put a silk over, like, can we build something that looks really nice but happens to diffuse a lot of light in that area? And that has helped us a lot in these areas. The thing you do have to pay attention to a lot is weather. And we usually, I don't do a lot of outdoor work because of this. So a lot of the shows I work on have pretty big budgets, and I remind the client about every week that anything can happen. And, we've mostly been okay and not had too many things rained out. But once you when you have a $250,000 show get rained out once and there's nothing you can do about it, it's not your fault. You tend to remind people over and over again that we saw one that we were told that it never rains in Vegas. Like, we were told that it never rains in Vegas, and I was like, but I still need a tent. Like, I need a tent no matter what. This was a little job for us, but a big job for a client. It was a red carpet outside, and we were told that it was definitely not going to rain, and we demanded a tent. Like, I was like, I'm not going to put my gear in the sun or outside or anything else. You will need to give me a tent, or I won't come. It was as if buckets had just been poured out of the sky. I mean, it was the most amount of rain I'd ever seen almost anywhere, let alone Vegas. Probably did a couple $1 million of damage because the Digicos and everything else were just sitting out in the sun. There was nothing. They were just soaked. The water was literally running out of the mixers. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
So I wanted to jump back in and say that if you're doing an event that is being streamed or videoed, that's one thing. If you're doing a theater piece, if you're doing Shakespeare in the Park, or if you're doing actual theater in a park or in a semi-outdoor venue or anything like that, you may not be able to work with silks because you want control of the light. And so if the show's going to be at 7:30, it's summer and the sunset is happening at 8, you need to do your rehearsals at 7:30. You need to figure out exactly what the lighting is going to do with that much ambient light from the sun. The sun is an incredible HMI. Like the sun does an amazing amounts of light. It's a particular color. It changes color.
It's so hard to dim. It's so hard.
Yeah, it's so hard to dim. Like I call my friend and it just doesn't do it. But but like it changes color with weather. It changes color with time of day, and you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're dealing with your light balance, your white balancing of your cameras. And I, as a lighting designer that has worked in outdoor venues before, oftentimes have to do my cueing in the middle of the night in order to have it be dark so I can really see what's going on.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is that if you start adding silks, you also have to pay attention to the weather, because wind becomes a big deal. So you have to pay attention to what that looks like. And there's all kinds of, if you're doing it in front of a lot of people, there's all kinds of structural and insurance and safety things that you need to put in. We've seen issues where that hasn't been managed well. But remember that anything you put up like that is going to turn into a big sale. And I've had some close calls on putting things up that I thought were going to protect my equipment or do lighting, and then we were worried that it was going to actually hurt somebody. So you definitely want to pay attention to that as well. Go ahead, Bill.
So two helpful apps for your phone. There's one called Sun Surveyor, which will track sun. The one I actually like more than that is called Commander Compass, and allows you to put in the date and time, and it will tell you in a 3D model. In the case of Commander Compass, it may also do that in Sun Surveyor. Tell you exactly, you can stand and turn around and know exactly where the sun will be at any particular date and time. It's useful.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. Has anyone had an experience with MongoDB, and when would you use it in place of PostgreSQL or another relational database? I'm considering using it for a genealogy project with a PHP front end.
Go ahead, John.
SQL has been around since the 80s, and it's structured, and it's very rigid in its creation and field structure. And Mongo is more for a page. It's more flexible for storing like pages or JSON, those sort of things. And if you're going to use Mongo, I suggest you use MongoDB Atlas in the cloud. You can get started for free. It's really, really great environment.
Yeah, I've worked on a couple projects where we had MongoDB. I probably wouldn't use it again. Just because you can get up to speed really quickly. So if this is a small project and you're putting it together, I think it works great. If you want it to scale and you want to have a lot of simultaneous users, it's less stable, and so we've definitely had problems. I mean, I think that I've talked about this before, but as we start to abstract a lot of these things into things that are newer, faster, easier, we start seeing some of the stability and security issues that arise, from that process, and we've had our own challenges with Mongo in that respect. Next question.
Next question comes from Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin. If I enabled 4K Dolby Vision on my Apple TV, I get 2 to 3 second intervals of black screen and no audio when YouTube switches from main video to ads. And on the switch back, is there a way to avoid this other than using HDR or SDR?
Go ahead, Jason.
My immediate thought is, are you only getting that on the YouTube app? Or are you able to do Dolby Vision elsewhere? Can you play Apple TV and without any issue? I've never seen it fail on one and work on the other.
Go ahead, Chris.
At the risk of spending your money, Steve, I got to say, I love YouTube Premium. I know that's not going to solve your immediate problem, but like when I sit down to watch a YouTube video with somebody who's not paying to not have the ads, an ad pops up in the middle of the video and it literally just sucks my soul out. It's like the saddest thing when an ad pops up in the middle of a YouTube video. And I realize that there's another tech problem here, and I don't mean to make light of it, but if YouTube wasn't switching away to ads, you wouldn't have this particular problem.
Well, and YouTube doesn't use Dolby Vision, so I'm not sure exactly, what that would actually look like. But I do think that you're basically the 2 second. It's probably exactly 2 seconds if you time it, and that is the length of the segment that it's delivering via HLS. So basically, it's jumping from one. It's coming to you, and then basically it has to jump to another stream. And it takes 2 seconds. The segment length on YouTube is a 2 second segment length. Now there's the segment length on YouTube, I think, actually corresponds also to the GOP, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we have a longer segment and a shorter GOP. But in this case, I'm pretty sure that YouTube sits at a 2 second GOP and a 2 second segment. And in that realm, it has to load that segment before it can deliver it to you. So that's probably what's happening there. I will underline with Chris that YouTube Premium is pretty awesome. Like I every once in a while, I've changed my credit card or something, and it gets out, and then suddenly I have ads for like a couple days as I get around to, I'm going to get around to doing it. I don't know how anybody watches YouTube with ads. Like I just don't understand I don't understand how anyone would think that was okay.
It makes me sad.
I just don't understand how anyone would do it. Like it's really a horrible experience, with ads. So I would highly recommend it. I would drink 2 less coffees a month and or buy a coffee maker and it's worth it. I promise it's worth it. The other time you'll see Apple TV do the switch is it does what you're talking about for me every time I go out of the interface and into playout, because I have my playout set to follow the original frame rate. And so what it has to do is it switches out of 30 frame to 24 every single time. But I tell it, I don't want it to force a frame rate from the Apple TV. And I also, even if I don't want it to force 24, I don't want it to force 30. So there's a setting in the Apple TV that says maintain the origination frame rate, I think is what it's called, or original frame rate. So it has to do the switch between the interface and the playback. And so you start hearing the audio about a second before the video. And all I can say is you get used to it. It doesn't bother me, but it's not in the middle of the show. It's just at the beginning of every show that I watch on any service. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Oh, this will be fun. What are the panelists' brand loyalties with gaff tape, electrical tape, and do you ever use scotch tape?
Go ahead, Jason.
ProGaff for gaff tape. I don't have a brand loyalty for electrical tape, and scotch tape is already a trademark. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Yeah, Pro Tapes, which does ProGaff, absolutely my number one go-to. Remember, with gaff tape, you can get multiple widths. You can get 3-inch gaff tape that has no adhesive in the middle if you're trying to not get goop all over your cables. They come in all different colors. Gaff's the best. Also, when it comes to electrical tape, my brand loyalty is about paying at least the middle of the road, if not the most, for electrical tape, because the adhesives are very different and it'll just be on your hands for 12 days if you get the cheap stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so for me, I'm a little obsessive about gaff tape. And what I want to know is that how long has that roll been in my library? Because gaff tape does age over the course of 10 years. And I've got some rolls that probably go back that. So for me, Sure Tape, the Pro Tape that they mentioned, there's a lot of good gaff tape out there. But I just always want to buy not the cheapest thing you can find, but a good quality tape from a vendor who sells through a lot. So it hasn't been sitting in the back room for 10 years because they bought too much back in, a decade ago. And it's a weird thing, but I get a new roll of gaff tape, and the first thing I do is quickly pull off 6 inches next to my ear and listen to how it sounds coming off, because there's a particular sound that good gaff tape makes coming off the roll. And you go, it's fresh, the stickiness cue is exactly right, and that makes me happy to hear that sound. If I don't hear it, I put that as the B-roll and try to find another roll that's better.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so same thing with the gaff tape that everyone's said, but we will use clear packing tape to protect spike marks on that we put down, for where set pieces go or where actors need to go. And then another nice thing to have in your kit is rescue tape, which isn't actually tape. It's a rubber that bonds to itself. You can use it for fixing plumbing leaks, but I'll also use it for. I've used it on headset microphones to attach the cable in the back to as strain relief, and it's a handy thing to have in your kit.
And once it bonds, though, it doesn't really unbond, right? It's a pretty permanent solution. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Just a real quick follow up to say that when Matt said they use packing tape to cover their spike marks, I twitched a little bit. So I would say use Marley tape. Marley tape is thicker, and it is the adhesive is better. It'll stay with the plastic when you pull it up rather than staying on your floor, and it's gonna last a lot longer. It's more expensive, but Marley tape, and Marley is the floor that's used for dance floors, so that the people's feet are not hurt so much when they dance, and the slip rate is the right slip rate for ballet dancers.
That's very technical answer there. I use the ProGraph as well. You also, when you go to a new venue, you may want to ask if they have any approved gaff tape. So, for instance, at Moscone Center, you need to use Bonn, BONN, and we used to buy it by the box because if they caught you using anything else, they would make you pull it all up. So so that was we learned that the first time, and it's not as sticky. It's really annoying. It's a super annoying gaff tape, but it's not as sticky, which means it doesn't stick. They know that it won't get as much goo on their floor, which is why they require you to use it. But we also think that somebody is probably getting a lot of good dinners out of that because it was a local, I think it was like a local gaff company. Anyway, so but the other thing is that. Remember that gaff tape is not, even though it's great to stick on a lot of things, it's still sticky. So one of the other things to remember is that if you're putting it on a wall, especially one that's expensive, really think about putting down painter's tape on the wall first, and then you put the gaff tape on top of that. So you get a bigger space of it if you're gonna attach it. We've had people attach stuff to expensive walls with gaff tape, and then we have to pay for that piece to be fixed. And it's really funny because it'll be like a little problem, but they have to repaint the entire ceiling or the entire wall to match it correctly to the thing. And there's a bunch of conversations. And just in case you're wondering, it costs about $1,800. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Black tack will change your life if you're using incandescent lights. Black tack is a black aluminum foil with an adhesive back. So you can put it on hot lights. If you use gaff tape on hot lights, I was just teaching somebody about this the other day. If you use gaff tape on hot lights, it'll get it to turn it into charcoal, one, make it's a fire, two, and the adhesive will not withstand the heat, and it'll just kind of float onto your actors at some point, and it'll be super.
Very cool. Next question.
Next question comes from Alex Lindsay in Nevada, California. Show and Tell Fridays. Have the panelists added any tools recently?
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
I just got a small rig component for my camera that will allow me to add rails so that I can add the because I got the wrong thing the first time, which happens. But then this will allow me to add the V-mount battery system that I've just invested in. So I'm excited.
And did you get the small rig battery system as well?
No, I ended up getting.
Because the cool thing about the small rig,
pick.
Right. So the cool thing about the small rig version of that, number one is always remember that the rails are slightly different on the small rigs than everybody else. So I think they do that on purpose. Nothing quite fits quite right. So if you don't get all small rig things, sometimes it's a little clunky. And I think that they do it on purpose, to be honest. But anyway, I could either resist it and say, I'm not buying any small rig, but I already have so much small rig stuff. Once I realized it, I was like, oh, I might as well just use small rig. So a couple things. One is small rig makes a toolkit that has tons of screws and all the tools that you need, and it goes into a little bag. it will make you super happy because you just have it in the bag and you open it up and you can add a couple things to it. It's got all the screws that you would need for a small rig and all the tools that you need for any of the small rigs that are there. Specifically with the battery pack, though, is that the small rig battery pack has DTAP, USB, and the barrel pins on the side, so that if you take any old V-mount and you slap it on it, you've got all those converters on the actual camera mount, as opposed to needing them for the coming out of the battery, which I have learned is super useful. So in that area, so I've got a couple of the small rig battery systems, and the batteries I get have all those converters too, which means I can use both. so it's at some point I'll overdrive the batteries, but I haven't done that yet. Go ahead, Chris.
Alex, it sounds like you're saying that not only did they invent their own rail system, but they've invented their own screw system. So please buy our screws. Anyway, so I didn't buy anything technical, but I did buy something of interest. I have this new desk.
Oh, a new desk.
I've added 6 feet.
Now, did you make it or did you buy it?
I could have made it, but it's not. It's IKEA. First of all, a few highlights here. If something were to happen to me and you guys need to get into all my accounts, here's where I keep my passwords posted. That's over here on the desk. And then also, I opted for the Alex. It's a drawer system. I have them over here too, but this is a short drawer system. It's exactly the right height to put a board across, and you make a desk out of it. And they're nice little drawers. So I don't know if can you see this here? And let me move my mic out of the way.
It's got a white background. We can see
drawer here, and then there's drawers over here as well. See that? Yeah. And it was super excited because I measured the distance from the front edge of my current desk to the back wall, and it was this weird 79.25 inches. And the tabletop that I got from IKEA, which is an a la carte item, 78.75 inches. So it was just fit in there perfect. But added desk space is cool. And these, I will say, these are easy to build, these Alex drawers. And, I've heard Alex gets a cut out of it.
I was just surprised you didn't use a Kulin, but I'm definitely glad that you didn't get a Herdal, because anything is an improvement over a Herdal.
The Alex drawers they're fun to build. I have a lot of them. I think I have 15 drawers in here. Mickey said that they were going to have a panelist question that asked, how many drawers do you have? And he was going to say that 15 is too many and I can't be on the panel anymore.
Funny thing is I have almost no drawer. I have 2 drawers, 1 drawer. Everything else is hooked.
So drawers,
so I can see
drawers get a lot of hate. There's, I think it's Savage says drawers is where you put things to die. I like a drawer. I like the tidiness of it. I put a label on the front of drawers and it tells me what's in it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, sometimes stuff gets lost, but what's the alternative? Just everything getting dust?
The thing behind me is that's the alternative.
Yeah,
lots of metal racks with things sitting on them
behind you.
I don't have any allergies. Go ahead, Bill.
I don't mind a drawer. I enjoy drawers. Some people hate
classic equipment, vintage dust is a plus.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I got my new toy. My new MacBook came, and so it was 7 hours last night to reprovision it from my online backup. And hopefully this weekend, everything ends up switching over. It's going to be interesting. One of the things I'm confused about is that they drop one port in favor of going back to MagSafe. And I didn't realize, I actually like the fact that one of my power port was also a data port on my previous model, which means that I got to put my OWC dock to feed power and have 4 ports instead of 3. So I know everybody politicked to please bring back MagSafe, please bring back MagSafe. But that in the very first day, I thought, is that a step forward or a step back? I'm not sure.
Go, Jason.
So I've been playing around again with the OWC Go dock, and I thought, how do I want to play with a dock if not with a 15-inch MacBook Air? And I like it. Not sure if I'll keep it, but this concrete floor, I might drop it. So not going to play around like this.
Good, Chris.
Hey, Bill, if you have any desire or need, I'm going to be having a lab later on how to install the ACE plugin for Reaper on the M machine.
I'll be there. Tell me what
Excellent.
time and where.
Excellent.
Definitely.
I got another toy. So this is my toy for the week. This was recommended by Mickey. We were recording audio at the soccer game last week, and it was too windy for the shotguns.
Did you buy a
and
blimp?
we knew I did buy a blimp. So anyway, so this is the open end of it.
Ooh,
This is the
yes.
Oh,
other
now
piece
that's
here.
a Zeppelin, yeah.
So this is the rye coat. I think it's the Cyclone, but it's specifically built for the surround. So this is built for the Ambio mic that's there. So it suspends it, and then it has this. And then I did order a dead cat that's coming later next week for it. But when it all comes together, it looks like that. So if you ever wonder what that looks like, that's what it looks like on the inside. This is what it looks like on the outside. And I'm going to take it to Hatteras and see if we can't capture some cool audio from the beach. So we'll see.
That looks awesome.
Just remember,
About a less expensive thing.
you
than
can
my
pack
Scorpio.
your underwear and socks in your luggage.
Exactly.
Extra protection.
Next question. Oh, wait,
Next
before we
question.
do that, just a real quick reminder that you can ask questions in the first hour. We've got a ton of questions stacking up for the second hour already. So definitely, I think it's going to be a great second hour on stage automation. I'm super excited about it. And I've got a bunch of questions myself. Anyway, if you have questions about stage automation, go ahead and throw those in for the second hour. If you've got questions, general questions like what we're talking about right now, go ahead and throw those in for the first hour, and make sure to vote on those questions so that we know what order you want us to manage them in. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Hasma Gajar comes back in from Cape Town, South Africa. Streamdeck app auto launches on login. How do I stop that as it is not in the login items list?
Where is it if it's not in the logins item? Usually it's in the login items. I don't know where else. And I will say that my Streamdeck, I don't believe starts up. Or if it does, I didn't know. It might be being activated. What I would do is try to restart your computer without the Streamdeck plugged in. It may be a function of the Streamdeck being plugged into your computer to see if it starts up automatically still and starts looking for it or not. Because I can't, that's the only thing I can think of that would activate that when it's not in a lock-in state. I don't know of any other place to put it. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Took me a second. It's so new macOS. This annoyed me so much that I actually completely got rid of the software. But allow in background. If you uncheck that and then remove the app, install it back again, it will say, "Can I be in the background, please, please, please?" If you say no, that should disrupt it.
Next question.
Next question comes from, that was back again. Tommy Schatz in St. Paul, Minnesota. What are the preferred surfaces or finishes for projecting onto? Outdoor stage and house of worship, not for permanent installs, and think of reuse.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should not be on that one. I don't know why that. Sorry.
Yeah. So and I guess so. You're talking about projecting to. Oh yeah. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Okay, so projection surfaces have multiple different values that you need to think about. The reflectivity of it and the diffusion of it. And as a projection designer in theater, we project onto all kinds of surfaces for all kinds of reasons. We might even project onto black, because the best thing about that is that you can pop something out of it and have it feel like there's no 16 by 9 square, which can be incredibly boring. I know we do that here, but it can be incredibly boring in a theater. You want to break those borders a little bit. But when you're in a theater for film, when you're in a cinema, then you want a very specific reflectivity and a very specific range of view, so that you get a really, really high quality image for the people that are in a dark room with no ambient light. And so it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And then, of course, there's rear projection and front projection. So if you're using rear projection, you need to make sure that the material has the amount, can bring the amount of light you need to see the information through it, but does not show a big orb of where the the source, the projection source is coming from. And I've found that it's a little confusing. You might think a darker RP screen would do less of that, but actually the gray ones seem to be the best, the middle of the road, not white, not black, in order to diffuse that center source orb. And it's a science, just say it that way.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, there are a couple of stats. Gain for the screen, how much light it reflects. Tlaloc hit most of the big points. I just note that I've generally relied on some of the big fabric. If I'm doing fabric screens, places like Rosebrand have a lot of variation in their screen projection stuff that you can buy just in bolts and then make a screen surface. Beyond that, I think Tlaloc hit 99% of what you need to know.
Yeah, the one that we've used in the past is a company called, for painting something, it's Paint on Screens is the brand name, and there's a lot of different versions of it. There's 4K, there's high gain, there's low gain, there's, so the low gain tends to be more outdoor, it's probably not as good. Or the high gain is not as good outdoors. Low gain is better on the outside ones, or at least that's been our experience. So I think that, that's the Paint on one. There's also a lot of, Daylight is the one we probably use the most for screens. So those are the ones we've ordered. They come in all kinds of different sizes. Some of them unfold, some of them don't, some of them are there. I have a screen that I take out every once in a while. It's about a 10 or 12 foot screen. And it cost me, I think, $80 on Woot like 10 years ago. And it works. It works fine. And it's about 10 foot and it will set up in about 15 minutes. And it has a lot of tension to it, and it actually goes together, and you can check it. so I've used it actually in a couple of different places. So you can decide how big you want it as well. And that's really, I would say, for a large number of people, 30 feet is the minimum size. But for small get-togethers and families, 10 feet actually works pretty well. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, actually, on that note, we used to have an inflatable, and they make these. They're not high tech, but you can get an inflatable screen for a backyard circumstance. Yeah, and if you use a lot of spikes into the ground and a lot of guy, because as we were talking about with scrims and things like that, these big screens can become hot air balloons if you're not careful.
I mean, so for those larger ones that you inflate, the thing you have to kind of take into account for those, and I think I have a picture of one that in Cambodia that we used. There's about a 30 foot system, and the thing you have to kind of keep in mind is that they are sails, and they're full of air, and they will, so we ended up using water ballasts. So these are big tanks, and then we pour water. We set them where they need to be, and then we pour water into them to give them weight. And we had, I think, 6 water ballasts to tie that in. So that is kind of that's par with the course of what you want to do. Oh, here we go. I got a picture of it. So this is, I guess it was only 4, but let me show you this. This is the blow up screen, and we use this in Anchor Watt. Let's see if I can see that. There we go. So here you can see the ballasts. This is a 30-foot blow up screen. Didn't take very long to put it together, but you can see the ballasts coming down here. So these are all full of water. That makes them easier to ship, to get them where you need them to be. And you'll see there's a little bit of structure in the back, but really it's held there. The other problem is that this screen will go in and out with the wind, so you can't find perfect focus. So we had 2 Barco 4Ks, on this, and getting them focused was a problem because they'd be focused out here, but the center part is coming in and out during the show. You do want to try to figure out, and some of it's luck and some of it was design. We tried to figure out where the wind was going normally. So wind has a tendency to go normally through a system in the same way, especially in a place like Anchor Watt where there's a lot of walls and stuff like that. It'll focus certain directions. And so what we try to do is make sure that the screen was parallel to was as parallel as we could make it to the wind direction, so that it would go in and out, but it wasn't getting pulled back and forth too heavily, because again, that'll affect your focus. Next question.
Hazma Kajar in Cape Town, South Africa. A Keynote update now supports SVG. What is SVG, and how does the support in Keynote step up versus how we create relative to how we create slide decks?
Good, Chris.
Hey, Hazbek, how you doing? SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. It's basically like an EPS or an Illustrator file. I'm not 100% sure, but it's really kind of like I believe it's sort of a more generic kind of scalable vector graphic. And in terms of like what exactly you can do with it, so like here's just a vector graph, SVG that happens to be on my system. And if we drag this into Keynote, I drag this over here, you could see, oh, it's a tiny little file, right? But because it's a vector graphic, I can scale it up basically infinitely because it's not an image, it's not a graphic, it's math that draws an image, and because it's math, you can multiply it by numbers, and it it just gets bigger. I know that illustrate.
Chris, I think that one, if you have that one in there, a question for you: if you select it and you go to Format and down to Shapes and Lines,
Let's do this together.
Yeah, let's do this together.
So here it is.
I'll show you this, and then you can show me how to install.
Okay. What am I looking for?
All right. So you're looking for menu? Under the Format menu. Take a look and see. Do you see Break Apart under Lines and Shapes? Lines and Shapes. Say Break Apart. That's the only option you have there. Did it say add too many shapes?
No, it says this image may look different.
Yeah.
Parts of this image are not supported and were removed or changed.
So this is still starting.
It looks quite a bit different.
Yeah. It's probably that's because what happened was that's just an image inside of that, or it's the way it's broken there. But with some SVGs, this is the big change. You could bring in EPSs in the past, and you could scale them up, and they'd have infinite scale. But with the SVGs, if they're built properly, you can break them apart, and then you can also turn them into shapes. And Jason, I'll let you go ahead and
Alex basically covered it. Yeah, you can turn them into shapes. You can animate them. You can address the color space of the shape individually. And the neat part is, even if you've got a long deck, SVGs are tiny compared to just about everything else. So go ahead.
But the big thing is that being able to change the SVG, break it up, and change it to a shape is a huge deal, because now what happens is you have a color scheme that you're planning to use, and you've got outlines. And what that means is that now you can change all the colors to the color scheme that you're using for your presentation, as opposed to whatever that was when someone saved it out as an EPS. So and you can also save it if you in Keynote. There is. Let's see here. I'll see if I can show it to you here. I'm sorry, like a new file here. In Keynote, if I want to add something, let's see here. So one of the things. Sorry, I'm on two different screens. But one of the things that I can do. I can do it here. Yeah. So shapes. Because I have down here, I have my shapes. So these shapes are my old logos. I have people. I have satellite trucks and satellites, cameras, PTZ, drones, Earth Light, which is without Antarctica, because who needs Antarctica on a map?
That's
and I have a US Light, which is, I just got rid of all the other stuff around it, so that I had just that selected. And so I've made those adjustments to the shapes. But this used to be very hard. My shapes was stuff that was designed to be used. Now you can take SVGs and turn it into my shapes. And when I add it, I can take this and just, make it whatever color. You can't do that with a EPS. So you need it to be a shape. And that's what, now I did this I brought these shapes in, because this is how this is how I do layouts.
Is that a flying saucer?
No, it's a guy. It's a
guy from the top. Come on.
Come on. You're
doing looks like flying saucer, dude.
I got it.
Just saying, I think you're doing a lot of work for Area 51, and you're not telling us.
Yeah, exactly.
You know stuff.
No comment.
You've been read in.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so the point is that I can change those shapes, and I can include it in my shapes. And so when I'm doing layouts, it makes it a lot easier to put some of this stuff. This is one sample of some of my layouts. Anyway, so the point is that the way I did that in the past was that there was a thing called AI to Keynote, which was like this weird little plugin that I thought would hack my system, but I needed to use it. So I'd bring in those shapes and convert them so that they'd open up in Keynote, and then I'd make them my shapes. So now we don't have to do that. The SVG, you can bring SVGs in, you can convert them to shapes, you can make your whole library of the things that you're laying out. It's a really important. We've been asking for the ability to bring this in for 20 years. So
by the way, Keynote's like 20 years old. So like, just so everyone's clear.
Version 1, we were like, hey, this is great. Can we bring stuff in from Illustrator? Oh, we're working on it. I got that answer for 20 years. So I'm really excited that we now have SVG. Go ahead. Chris.
So you kind of answered my question. So EPS files to me was always sort of the generic of scalable, and then Illustrator is a tiny subset of EPS files in that you can have layers. Now I just tried to pull in an Illustrator file that didn't work. I didn't get the break apart, but I also tried to pull in an EPS file and I didn't get the break apart as an option. Is that true? That's
true, because those are encapsulated and they're not. It has to be an SVG, and that's the advantage. But you could bring in the EPSs and PDFs and everything else before. What you couldn't do is break it apart, and what you also couldn't do is assign colors to it.
So is the break apart menu item new because of SVG?
No.
So what could you break apart before SVG?
Just shapes.
Well, so if I take this shape, let's say
screen, please.
Oh yeah, sorry. So if I grab, let's say, this satellite here, and my transmission satellite that I have here, what I can do is I can go. You won't be able to see it because that's another screen. But I say, okay, I want to break it apart. So now I've broken it into its individual items. And I can sit there and go, I want to, so now I can delete that, and delete this and have a different,
a broken satellite.
I can double click on, you can also, so you can start to edit. The other thing you can do here is I can go in and I can say, make editable, because it's a shape. So now I have the curves. So I can, grab onto it, and actually change the shape, from that. So so now it's firing instead of receiving. so anyway,
the satellite weapon.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that those tools are now available to us. When you had PDFs and EPSs, we couldn't edit the edges, we couldn't break up the shapes, and I know that we probably spend a lot of time talking about something that people are like, okay, but some of us make a lot of Keynote documents. And this is a really key addition. The only thing missing now is, there's some animation stuff we'd like to see, but the only thing from shapes is getting USDZ in. So once we get 3D models into the Keynote, our presentations will be.
So in the hierarchy of scalable graphics, which do you think is the most powerful, SVG or AI?
AI.
That's a hard question. Illustrator files are more powerful. SVG are more transportable. They're more compatible, so EPS and especially SVG. SVG is much more compatible than AI because it only works with things that can grok AI. But SVG will work in the web. It'll work everywhere. Right. So it was the right format to use.
And what does the encapsulated PostScript file mean? Encapsulated.
It's not code. Like PostScript is like just code. It's the code of the curves, and that's what we started with. But encapsulated PostScript is, I'm going to pull this all into an image, kind of like USDZ. USD is a folder of things, and Z is zip it. We're going to zip it together. So an encapsulated PostScript is a single file. Let's go to the next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York City. And David says, any go-to places to get custom-made USB cables? I have a need for some USB-C to USB Mini and Micro. Would rather have native than use adapters.
I go with Jason.
Okay, this is half an answer. I've never needed a custom cable that Gotham can't do, ever. That said, I've never done USB-C to USB Mini or Micro without just getting them prefab. So I don't know. I would try Gotham.
I would also look at Cable Matters or Clark Cable or Monoprice just to see what they have there. If they have to be very specific sizes, that's one thing, but USB cables are pretty precision when it comes to building these cables. I don't know. I think I'd want them to be prefabbed somewhere, and I think you may be able to find those. I think even Monoprice may have them for like $3. So definitely take a look at that before you have someone build them. It's complex. Next question.
James Fosseline, and I thought for a minute this was wrongly categorized, but I don't think it is now. How do the theater designers on the panel think about their experiences? How do they think that their experiences affect work outside the theater, for example, streaming work?
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Well, I think it helps me because I've learned a lot about a lot of different things. you need to know so much and think so holistically in the theater in a way that's sort of different than, for example, working on film, where things are so departmentalized and you're not allowed to sort of cross those disciplines at all. So I've had to think a lot about how the whole system works and what problems come up in those ways. And I think that's probably my biggest value add when it comes to the streaming and other things.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, some of the streaming things that I've picked up since COVID happened, like having an idea of structure and run of shows. So I've had people wanting to do things, and now it's like, okay, so you're doing this now. How are you getting to here, to here, to here? It's like you need connective pieces. But then also, technology wise, it's always like learning the latest thing, or what's the tool that's going to solve this, and then that's a whole backlog of experiences and knowledge that it's like, okay, I can use this to edit this, or I can use this to control something else.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York City. So Whisper does a great job at transcription, but what are the best for translation? I have some events that I need to translate the Japanese to English and vice versa for closed captioning.
Go ahead, John.
GPT-4 speaks 20 languages. It works pretty darn well. Give it a try. Paid version, $20 a month.
Yeah, and I would also look at Mac Whisper. I think is going down the language route. You may want to go there and request a beta for that. So, but I think Mac Whisper may be doing that's using the Whisper AI protocol to make that actually happen. Google also does a pretty good job. There's some Google APIs that will do it automatically that a lot of people use. So a lot of times when you see even live interpretation, there are certain languages we can't get to. So Mandarin, Hindi, other languages like that are not, there's no keyboard to do the telestration. You have to use AI if you want to do it live. And so typically what's done there is that we might have a live transcriber that is, on a keyboard, basically putting the captions in, a live captioner. That goes into a system that then converts it to languages in real time to make that happen. You always have to make sure everybody knows it's not going to be what they thought it was supposed to be. Like there's definitely going to be words that don't mean what you think that they mean. Language is a very subjective thing, and the computer can only get so far. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. I made the mistake of updating to the new macOS, and now Audio Hijack does not work on my main computer. I am getting an echo when Audio Hijack is on. There is no echo when Audio Hijack is off.
Go, Jason.
Oh, Tony, I hope you didn't upgrade to Sonoma. If you upgraded to macOS Sonoma, the beta version, if you look on Rogue Amoeba's webpage, you're kind of hosed. I mean, they straight up say it's not supported yet.
Yeah, you might have to. I don't know if you can. I'm sure you can back out of Sonoma.
I'm sure you can, but it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, but you probably have to reinstall. Next question.
Yeah, that's okay. Jack Cannon, Phoenix, Arizona. Up next, ongoing saga of car-mounted Mac Mini ordered the UPerfect 15.6-inch touchscreen monitor. What would you choose for a mouse and keyboard option to pair with that?
Go, Jason.
But I love this approach, and I think you're nuts for using a Mini in a car. As long as you're not driving, I would say that ThinkPad, believe it or not, Lenovo ThinkPad makes a USB and Bluetooth keyboard, and remember that little red thing in the middle that you could actually use as a mouse?
You're trying to find a good word for that we can use on the show.
The nipple, that's what I called it. I'm sorry, that's what I've always called it. But
pointing, it's a
eraser head.
The eraser head, yeah. It's literally like a pointing button or something is what they call it. So there's a technical term for it, but yeah. It's the little basically a joystick that is
micro
in the center.
Joystick, yeah.
It's pointing, a track point is what they call it. Sorry, track point. That's the technical term for what's in the middle of there. And that one will be easy. Also think about a some kind of ball, track ball is another one. But you don't want as a mouse, because the mouse will be too hard to make work in a car, in my opinion. Go ahead, Chris.
So Jack, this is something Jack and I have been talking about for a year now. As much as I don't like the Bill Davis trackpad, I would use a Bill Davis trackpad in the vehicle. And the reason for it is that although I'm not a fan of spaces in the Mac OS, when it comes to a vehicle-mounted Macintosh, I would probably use spaces. So I would use I would have one space for navigation. I have one space for Zoom. I would have one space for, watching movies. And yes, these are all things I do in my car. I apologize. But that is a very easy thing to do with one hand while you keep your eyes on the road or the screen. Swipe, swipe, swipe to between the spaces. And I know that the trackpad works quite well for that. Also, yeah, one of those things. Now, is that the Apple one, Alex, or is that a third party?
This is the Apple one, and I will say if you're using it with a Mac, I would use this one. I've used a lot of different trackpads, and I use the Apple one because it has the best interface with the computer. Like it's just the smoothest to work with the computer, and it is nice.
And I think that you could mount that like on a flexi arm or some sort of a arm next to your gear shift knob, and then I would use that
Loctite.
Yeah, I would use that
Loctite with a Visa mount. That's I've thought about it.
So listen, I just ordered. There's a company called Bullet Point Mounting, and they have a whole mounting system for vehicles and phones and iPads and Bears Oh My. And they have a 20. They use a 20 millimeter ball standard, unlike the Mag.
Yeah, a lot of police departments use them.
Yeah. There's another system that uses a 25 mil mounting ball, but they have a suction cup mount, and you could, I mean, it's a little expensive, but you could mount that thing to that suction cup mount on the end of a 20 millimeter ball, and it would be super. It's one of the really good suction cups that have the, this thing, where you go right, and now it's suctioned, and it makes that noise. And then I would use the little keyboard when I absolutely positively have to enter text. But I think most of the time you won't have to enter text. And I know that in my vehicle, I have a wider center console, and I know that that scratch and sniff pad would mount. That's where it's going to go.
Follow.
I think RAM mount could probably do a really good job holding that trackpad that you were just showing, Alex.
Right.
But looking into the future a little bit, my mind was just blown a little bit, because if you think about the technology, the eye tracking technology that's happening with the Vision Pro, and then you put that into a car, I just wonder what sorts of things might be on the horizon in that regard. And then, you probably want to do your automatic driving as well, so you're not running into things as you look for your.
There's actually
your icons.
Code in the Vision headset that disables it when you go past 20 miles an hour.
I think it's cool.
He's joking.
Bill, go, Bill.
So when you switch to trackpads, not if, but when eventually, the thing that I figured out eventually is that about 60% of the power of the trackpad isn't actually in the ballistics or the how you interact with it. It's the multi-touch gestures they've built in. Once you myelinate those, once they're part of your reactions, this single finger, two finger taps, double taps, and things like that becomes part of your physical interaction with your computer. You don't think about it anymore, and it just means your hand stays in one position, which I think is the best way to interact with something while you're driving, is to take that hand, put it where you need to, and do everything without any kind of rolling something around. I'm all for it.
Next question.
Next question comes from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany. OBSBOT Mini 2 arrived. Works fine so far. For the first time, I got a USB-C cable with an on-off switch attached to it. It's a little disappointing. The remote only works with the installed software, not standalone. Thoughts?
I would never do that. I would never get a USB with a switch on it. That seems like a recipe for disaster. So when that switch isn't working anymore, it's going to be a real bummer. So I would not have a switch in my USB thing. I guess that's what I would say. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. Would there be any bandwidth concerns for putting multiple Zoom bots from one location into a meeting?
100%. Each Zoom bot needs 6.25 megabits per second. So it just depends on how much bandwidth you have and how many bots. So I think that office hours right now in our system, when the panel is full, I believe it's between 200 and 300 megabits a second is what we're pulling to do office hours into the building right now. Go ahead, Chris.
6.25.
It is.
Is that measured by Alex Lindsay standards, or is that advertised from Zoom?
Measured, and it's not advertised. It's me sitting there. I have a bandwidth counter right here.
6.25.
Yeah.
This is the importance of office hours. Only here will you get that precision information. Thank you, Alex.
I mean, it fluctuates a little bit. Like it does fluctuate a little bit, and it is.
What's the high end? What are we talking?
6.25 is the high end. Right now I'm running. As I talk to you right now, I'm running more in the vicinity of, it's a little bit less than that right now. It's probably 5. I'm at about 5. About 5 right now. 5.6 megs a second right now. And now it's going down low because I'm not moving as much. But
if you move your hands real fast, will it increase?
But it seems to tap at 6.2, 6.25, somewhere in that range. It seems where I've never seen it go over that per connection. So that's but there's no, I don't think anyone's published anything. maybe I'm wrong.
Matter?
This is pure experience over the last 3 years of doing this every morning. I look up at my little bandwidth thing, and that's what it looks like. All right. We're now jumping into the second hour, and we're so excited. We're going to be talking about stage automation, and it's one of my favorite things. So I do a lot of events, and you can put LED walls back there. You can have cool lights. But when things on the stage start moving, now you've got something that's pretty interesting. I worked on one event where we had to show something in it. It literally was most of the event, even though the event was an hour and a half long, almost all of our time was spent getting this one thing to come out of the stage. so we, and have it spin around at just the right speed and everything else. It's magical. So really glad we've got an incredible crew here to talk about stage automation. So if you've got questions about it, this is going to be the time to ask these questions. And I'm going to let Tlaloc kind of introduce everyone and give us a little bit more background. Go ahead and take it away, Tlaloc.
So stage automation is near and dear to my heart. Even though I'm a lighting designer, sometimes when I start seeing a scenic design coming in and there's a turntable or there's a lot of movement that wants to happen with the scenery, I immediately start asking, can we automate it? Because I find it to be clunky and problematic if things are not repeating itself and happening the same way every time. And as we've gotten more and more into automation, and we'll talk much more about this as we go, things are much more repeatable. We can get data out, and we can work with things like projection design to follow along a piece of scenery as it moves. There's just a huge amount of positives to this. Safety, if you're going to be moving a big, heavy thing around on stage, it should happen the same time every time. Same way every time. There should be a way to stop it. There should be all these safety situations at hand. So today we get to talk about that in this context. And, we do a lot of events and streaming here. We have some theatrical people here, but we're going to talk about all of those things. And we have Mike Wade from Creative Connors, who which is a company that builds these things and builds these components in order to make this kind of work happen. And Dan, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, but Dan, he's here, and I think does a lot of work as well with automations, and will tell us what he knows. And Matt Parker's here, and Matt Parker works in theater. So we have a lot of really great thoughts and angles on this topic, and I'm super excited to get into it.
Yeah, so I guess that, the first question is, how do these conversations usually take off? Like for our experts here, where does the conversation usually begin? When does someone call you and start talking about it? Does anyone have any? Is there a specific time? Or I guess the more important one is, when do you wish that they would call you and talk to you about it? Because a lot of times we get into this thing where, for live streaming, I know that what I get into is someone comes to me 3 weeks before the event and they're like, we would like you to live stream it. And I'm like, it would have been really good for us to talk for the last 6 months while you were planning the event. It would have been a better show, So for you, when would you prefer, I guess, is a better question of when would you guys prefer someone to call you and start talking to you about the idea?
I'll take this one. This is Dan Wasowski. at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And before that, I worked at a number of companies who do contracted work for major entertainment venues, both theater and amusement parks. So for me, the most successful integrations of automation, stage automation, come when the technical designers are brought in early into the design process. Oftentimes, we'll find that that either the solution that the designers came up with is somewhat impractical, right? Defies physics, or is limited from what they really wanted because they think they couldn't do it, right? It can't be achieved. So bringing in the technical team, the technical design team early into that design conversation about what the real intent of the automation is really does strengthen the overall product and does incorporate the expertise of the designers who are doing the visual work as well as the technicians to really put a great product on stage.
And I think that that's the case almost every single time that we've had productions on our end, is that we always tell people, even if you're not going to hire us, or you don't even know if you're going to hire us yet, or you don't know where it's going to go, just call us and brainstorm. Just let us tell you, oh, in that area, you may want to do this, or watch out for this, or it'd be really cool. And it also lets me sometimes for months ahead of time, that seed of their idea of what they're trying to do has now been planted in my head, and I'm sitting there walking around thinking, oh, I know what they could, I know something that we could do that would be kind of off the charts. Are there certain things that, I guess for each of you, do you have a project that you were really proud of, like one that you did and there was something really cool? What was it, and what was really cool about it when you put it together? I don't know if anyone wants to start here. I'm going to throw it. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I've got some footage of some things we've done. So this first one, this is a Revolve for a Hero the Musical that we did a few years ago. And these are the actors rehearsing on the Revolve in the scene shop and getting a chance to figure out how the blocking and works with the show. The Revolve has the cutaway of a house, the backyard that you can see here, and then I've got a shot of it in the show after this. And so as he's doing the opening song, the set's revolving, and then he's moving across the stage, so maintaining where the audience can see him, crosses into the comic book shop, and then the set will stop here. And so this is all on a Revolve driven by a motor. And so here it is within the show with lighting in context. And the Revolve, there's a deck on top of the stage floor so that you don't see the lip right there of where the Revolve is. So from the audience, it just looks like a single surface. And then throughout the show, they transition between scenes. And by having the motion, being able to do it like this, you're saving the time from having to go to a blank stage, play music for 2 minutes while they shift the scenery. And this is another show called Beatsville that opens up out front of the cafe, revolves around, and then reveals the set with the band playing in the center. This is a slip stage. So this is essentially about a 4-foot wide platform. That's the width of the entire stage that, unfortunately, is quite dark in this shot. But we've got a motor that pulls the set from side to side, and we're able to set.
And is there and what kind of is the motor? A servo, stepper? What type of motor are you using there?
So the turntable is moved with a motor that drives a small car tire. So here's So here's a plan view of the turntable, and then here is the motor, and then it's got a tire that pushes up against the edge of the rotating platform. There's a center pivot point that holds it in place. And then if you've got a really heavy thing, piece of scenery, what's good to have are tires on the other side of the platform that give resistance to keep the center pivot.
And is that platform sitting on bearings or lots of wheels?
There are this particular one was fixed casters. Because if you put swivel casters, which I've had to do on other revolves just because they need to strike, there needs to be a little bit of slop in the system for the tires to swivel as you change directions.
Right.
And then next to the motor, there's a small wheel that rests up against it that feeds back to the motion control computer to let it know that the revolve is actually moving.
Right. And what kind of precision does this have? Like, are you within a couple degrees when you get from one place to the next, or are you within a degree? I mean, with a tire and those types of things, how much slop is there?
I wonder if we could have Mike jump in on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, the amount of slop kind of really, in my experience, comes around to not the drive tire, but how smooth and accurate that edge is that that dancer wheel encoder is taking that position from. The smoother and the cleaner that edge is, the more realistic it is that we're going to be able to land at a much tighter tolerance at our, desired position.
Absolutely. Dan, do you have anything that pops to your head as far as projects you worked on that were particularly interesting?
Yeah, I did a lot of cool projects when I was with Fisher Technical Services, but the ones that I think I would talk about now was a project I did probably 5 years ago now here at the university, in which we staged a production of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland based on the book, in which we had a single actor driving the show. So using multiple Microsoft Kinect sensors, we had this actor both driving the projection system based on their movements and location on the stage, as well as the stage automation equipment in the system. So in the stage automation system, we had a treadmill that when activated, when like Alice was chasing the rabbit in the initial scene, it would keep her centered on stage depending, regardless of what speed she was going. So she could be walking, she was jogging, it monitored her position and her body position, right? So if she's leaning a little bit forward, it is indicating in the system that she's going faster, right? So when we walk, we're more upright. And if we're trying to jog, we're actually leaning forward. It would monitor the difference in your shoulder spine versus your hip spine base. And it would kind of compensate for that in the system. It also had a performer flying aspect in which when Alice was tumbling down the rabbit hole, she was in control of her position and her dynamic movement as she fell through the hole based on her hand position. So if she put her hands up, she would actually raise up. If she kept them stationary, she would stay where she is, and she put them down, she would kind of go down within the performance window of it all. And then that also had to track when she was walking on stage. So we had a dynamic slackline detection system that the performer flying hoist would allow her to kind of move around the stage without having the huge dangle that you would have if you're just kind of having a single point performer flying hoist in that system. So a lot of this required some heavy duty functional safety. That's what my specialty is. I develop and research functional safety systems, specifically in dynamic automation. In dynamic automation, when we talk about it in stage automation, is when the set point is delivered by an external source, whether that be, in this case, multiple Microsoft Connect sensors, or whether that be a soundboard or a lighting board, right? So how do we continue to make our system safe with these external set points, which for years was considered a huge automation no-no, right? Like when I went through school, the idea of controlling any stage automation with DMX, which is a lighting protocol, was one of the big no, you never do that kind of things. And now with the advances that we've had in functional safety, that is very possible to do safely. So that project was just amazing to kind of work on, from the creative side of it to the end product. So.
Absolutely. I know when I'd done a lot with motion control cameras, and there's lots of big tape that goes around where we're doing action of like, do not step inside that line. Like, right. Like it's going to move very fast, and we're not going to be able to adjust for it. So you need to stay out of this. Safety becomes sometimes half of the show is just for figuring out what we can and can't do to make that happen. Mike, do you have anything that jumps out for you of things that you worked on?
I think kind of the like seeing that cool aha moment, especially in a live event where, you see the entire space transform just based on a few things that are moving around. And it could be, like Matt said, a turntable, right? That's a pretty awesome trick. But as soon as you add in a couple of flying pieces or a couple tracking pieces, maybe you're even throwing in a tracking piece that spins as it goes around. And so you come from, like the outside of the house, and you end up spinning pieces around and sliding in new parts and flying in bits and pieces to go into this entire internal view of whatever that external was. There was a really great production that involved a house and a turtle and a couple pallets that the Huntington did quite a few years ago now that I wasn't directly involved in, but that moment almost every night got applause from the audience as they saw this transformation happen.
Absolutely. Now, Tlaloc?
So for me, one of my favorite moments with a turntable, actually from Creative Connors, was here at Brevard Music Center, and we had essentially like a viaduct on top of the turntable with this big giant tree. It was for Midsummer Night's Dream, and the viaduct would have to come back to points where the actors could walk onto it. So the accuracy was super important. It had to stop at the right point. There couldn't be any gaps, and couldn't have anybody walking off of things. Of course, stage lighting doesn't mean that it's good visibility for the actors. It means it's good visibility for the audience. So we have to really, really have these accuracies in there. And I remember from being part of that project that Creative Connors controls had the ability to think about what kind of slip rate a particular methodology has, and sort of look at that and test it to known points, and then add that back into the system so that things could really, really stay very, very accurate. And I just have a very fun memory of that.
We have a lot of questions stacking up, so we're going to go ahead and jump into them. Let's go to the first question.
Our first one actually comes from Tlaloc here in the panel. A question from Michael. How and where have you seen stage automation leave the theatrical realm and entered events, television, or other types of uses?
Go ahead, Michael.
I mean, I think almost every day, right? There is stage automation in multiple TV studios and in almost every theme park and in many corporate events. We want flashy, right? If it's, I think Alex, you mentioned before, right? Put an LED panel at the back of the house, at the back of the stage. But what's even cooler is when that LED panel breaks open and your CEO comes through the middle and then it closes behind them. So I think that there's, I mean, I think there's really no limit to where stage automation can kind of creep into other industries that are adjacent, or that even the theater world is adjacent to, and be successful.
Absolutely. Next question.
James Fosseline is coming to us from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Have you experienced software control software being retired? And if so, how did you deal with it no longer being available?
Go ahead, Matt.
I've got an install that is actually dark right now, but has been running for like 10 years, that was originally programmed with Stage Reacher's SFX as the main show controller that would talk to Light Factory for controlling lasers, beacons, CO2 cannons, air cannons, and then magnetic relays for triggering drop boxes in kind of a laser tag sort of arena. And the show had gotten so complicated that the system would lock up if you ran it too many times in a row without rebooting the computer. And so I eventually converted the system to a Gilderfluke box. And Gilderfluke is like one of the companies that kind of spun out of Disney Imagineering. And think of them as kind of like show control Arduino boxes. So I used a show control box about the size of a chalkboard eraser. And it's able to output stereo sound. It'll control servos. It'll send DMX. And so I captured the DMX that we had from the old system into their program called PC Max that only runs on a PC, oddly enough. But, and that's meant for, it's portable, so you can put it in a small thing. So you could build like a prop or something that would run off of this, like Chuck E. Cheese, the animation there, because you can control servos and build your animation on a timeline.
No, absolutely. And I guess the question is at some point, I mean, are there things that you still use that they haven't made for a long time? I guess that's a question for like, is it something that you still, like, I know that there's a motion control camera. We were talking about this the other day. There's a motion control camera that we use called a Cooper system. And I think it still runs on floppies. Like, we still load the stuff into it on floppies, and the floppy that we use is like really dark. It's everyone's dirty hands, and it's just like, it's very gross. But what's funny is we're using Maya and Motion Builder and all kinds of other things to design the moves, but then they get brought into the system because it's still rock solid and it still works after 30 years. And so it's one of those things like everyone's careful with it because I don't think that even the parts are available again.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So parts that, I mean, if you've got something that just like does one thing, then, it doesn't matter that it's running on DOS, and you don't, as long as you've got, hardware that'll reliably run it, then, and that's the only option, then that's what you've got.
Yeah. And a quick reminder for our panelists, because we have multiple panelists there, definitely take a look at the back end. You can raise your hand so we know whether you want to answer any of those given questions there. Go ahead, Tlaloc. Yeah,
I mean, at the end of the day, these are mechanical things that we're needing to actuate. So there are certain things where you are actuating a speed controller, or you're actuating, a valve in pneumatics, or you're actuating a valve in hydraulics. And so there may be a switch, that is being used to do that. And depending on what it is you're doing, the thing that starts to get more complicated is when you're combining points or access, what are they called? Access points that essentially say, okay, or channels of direction. Like, we're moving this way, we're rotating this way, and you're combining those, and you have to start to have a much more complicated control system. Right. And when does that happen, and how is it queued? And so the more complication you have, sort of the harder it would be to shift from a control system to another control system. But still, it's all just switches. So you can do it. You just have to have the time.
Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry, Mike.
Just to bump in on this a little, I think we've run into it, and I imagine a whole bunch of other people have too, where there's like permanently installed systems in in a theater, line sets or curtains or whatever, that are control systems that were bespoke for that one space, software that was also bespoke for that one installation, and and 15 years ago, the people who designed that system and that software retired. And so, as even so you can run into some pretty significant challenges, especially if there's a failure, even if it's just a relay or fuse, just trying to get that repaired. And if the institutional knowledge has been lost, it can be a real heartache to get from everything was fine to nothing is working to everything's back fine again.
It's funny. We were having this discussion about a year ago with a production that I was working on, where we were talking about the fact that they the person I was working with only wanted to work with people who are experts. And I'm like, the problem with working with people that are only experts is that if they leave, they're the only ones that knew how to work it. Having assistants around is spreading out the knowledge as well. And having them delegate that out means that when they move on to the next thing, you have somebody else that at least knows which way is up. With that, and I think that that's a key factor I know in production that we run into as well. Next question.
Next one comes again from Colico Lopez Waterman in Brevard, North Carolina. Is all stage automation computer controlled?
Go ahead, Matt.
So I've got something we use for a trapdoor lift, and it's essentially an industrial controller that Show Motion makes that controls. This is an elevator for a trapdoor center stage. And so basically I haven't actually programmed this, but you can set trims, and then there's two things that it's controlling here. There is the sunroof, which are these two panels that they will drop down a couple inches and then slide to the side. And that makes a hole in the floor, and then this platform here is able to move up into the opening on the stage, and we can have actors ride up pieces of scenery or props or such. And it's not a PC computer, but it's.
Are there certain types of processors that are popular? So FPGA versus PCs or Raspberry Pis or Arduino. Are there any that you see a lot of in automation?
We tend to work with Show Motion for the bespoke stuff, for our turntables and for that. The other stuff that I've done, I'll, depending on what the project is and what I need to control, predominantly coming from sound show control, SFX and QLab are my main focus. But Gilder Fluke is something that is a rock solid piece of hardware that I've set up for installs.
Absolutely, Dan.
Yeah. So going back to your question, Alex, I think the equipment that is most commonly used is either an FPGA or an ASUS with for those companies that are making their custom boards. The majority of regional theaters or that do their own are more likely using something like a programmable logic controller, whether that is made by Alan Bradley. A lot of them, in a lot of my experience, uses Beckhoff automation systems, which technically can be run by any computer, but also have their own head modules that allow that to happen. So what the benefit of those type of systems is, you don't have to develop the lower end programming software to make it happen. They have programming software that is used in factories, right? That these are components that are used in automation systems in the industrial industry, and we have incorporated them into theater. But going back to, is all stage automation computer controlled? I think my answer would be no, and in many ways it shouldn't all be. The answer being that the simplest solution is usually the best solution to make things happen. So if you don't have to have, for precision and accuracy and repeatability, these travelers being automated, then have somebody push them on stage, right? I think the reliability of it all comes into play, and the cost comes into play, right? The automation companies that I work with want to automate everything, right? But in reality, the simplest solution is often the best solution, that comes into play. But even push button systems are common, right? I think somebody mentioned, right? You don't need to. You can have an electrical push button going to a valve that opens, that runs some pneumatic system that isn't computer controlled. That is a perfect, viable solution for a lot of automation projects.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back with this one. What experiences have you had with industrial automation professionals adjusting to the production world?
Tlaloc?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they adjusted well, because we had some Siemens equipment coming in to be utilized for some overhead line sets moving in and out, and they built, and I don't know if it was the consultant or if it was Siemens, but they built this incredibly complicated safety system that was so complex and had to have everything be so perfect that the only way to move anything was to turn the safety system off. And so, which is no safety system at all. And so I think where you run into problems with industrial companies trying to do this kind of work is thinking about how it is actually used in theater and what people have to do to make it happen, and what things happen day to day in order to get the job done.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just to kind of tail onto that. The industrial automation is generally set up once, and it's going to do the same thing, right? We're going to fill every one of those bottles with barbecue sauce, or make that lighting fixture. And in the entertainment world, in the theater world, we may have a line set that is, yes, always going to go up and down, but there are going to be different things attached to that line set and other factors that are going to come into play about changing the parameters, what it can do and cannot do in a given path. So that industrial, like having that kind of being able to distance yourself from the idea that you have an assembly line and there is a yellow line on the floor and nobody goes past that yellow line, to the stage where there is no yellow line. Everybody is going to be walking around everywhere.
Yeah, I think that one of the through lines for my career, working from all the different areas that I've worked in, is that how important that interface is, what you're talking about of, am I going to build this and only never change it? And how powerful it is when you can say, I can change anything, relatively often. Maybe it's not immediate, but I can sit there with an iPad or something else and go, oh, do you want it over here? Do you want it over there? Do you want this light up here? And when people have that fluidity, you end up with a better show, right? I mean, because it's, you're able to get to the solution faster. There's a lot of things we don't do because we just don't have the interface for it. Like we don't have the way to make that adjustment. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois, up next. What are the benefits to having something digitally and automated versus an analog and or human-driven action? And he notes Koken, stagehands, and so forth. Or is there a use case for hybrids?
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, the benefits of digitally automated systems, like we were highlighted earlier, is the repeatability of it, right? If you're trying to match light cues or sound cues or video cues with automation or a particular piece of scenery being at a particular place at a particular time, the automated systems have a lot more functionality to do that, or much more repeatable and reliable to do that. There are also limitations into what you can do with weight and size. The automated systems can move things that are heavier faster than you can with most human-driven systems, and those right? So there's a safety element involved in kind of having the stage automation do those things. And I guess the last question, is there a use case for hybrids? And in my experience, there always wants to be a hybrid solution, right? You always want to have a way to move that equipment if the digital or automation system fails off of the stage, right? Whether that is a wagon that is being driven on and off stage, having some way to disengage the mechanical system, the electromechanical system from the wagon, such that you can move the wagon off stage in the case that it does fail, is just good practice. That also comes into play when you're working with flying performers. There needs to be a way for you to get those flying performers out of the air. They can only be in the air for so long in a performer flying harness before they will have I can't remember the exact words, but there's a shock that happens if you stay in a harness for too long. So there needs to be a safety plan for that. Most of those safety plans are a hybrid case in which you are you're manually lowering that person. Sometimes it is fluttering the brakes with a backup system, but there's lots of ways to do that.
And in some way, would you say that there's also, beyond safety and reliability, there's also being able to dance with the performance itself? So having people doing it by hand, sometimes the automated kind of limits you to a point where you can have people off stage that are reacting to things that they're seeing. Does that come into play as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the performance itself is dynamic and you're not having it right where it is not the same every time, automation may not be the right way to go, right? Because you want to have it be a little bit more fluid as you go through that process.
Okay, go Tlaloc.
I wanted to point out that automation can not be electrical. You can actually automate scenery by manual actuation with winches and drums that get cranked, and they sometimes, you'd think that would have a lot of feedback, and if something was going wrong, that they would then know it with the feedback back to the drum. But as it turns out, there was one experience that I know about where there was a winch drum that was pulling a wagon, and a foot got in the way of it. And the guy was like, well, why isn't this going? And he just cranked it 3 or 4 times trying to get it to the right position. But that was a foot. So this is the kind of things that we have to think about when it comes to safety. And how do we make sure that there's always there's always visuals on stage, and there's always eyeballs on stage, and there's ways to stop things, whether it be by stopping somebody from cranking or by stopping the system. And safety is paramount.
Next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts. Up next, is there an overlap between higher-end consumer and or home automation and industrial automation, especially for smaller budgets?
I think that the biggest problem with a lot of those right now is in homes is it barely works. So I think that the problem is that you trying to put it into performance. We talk about it. I have automation in my studio, but I wouldn't use it in a show. Because it's I feel like it. I'm just happy when it turns on and off. Let alone do it at precision. Predictably. Go ahead, Mike.
I mean, I think, Alex, I was just about to kind of get into that same thing, right? If we're trying to, it's that reliability and safety, the confidence of it. And I think also tied in with the amount of time to create all of those bits and pieces, right? The controllers and putting the controllers together, whether it's an Arduino or if it's something more advanced like a Beckhoff, or if it's somewhere in the middle, like the pretty amazing Click PLCs from Automation Direct. There's, I think you're kind of trying to balance all of the bits to how do I accomplish the task that I'm trying to get to, which is in the end, maybe that curtain opening and closing, and how can we do that in the time and the money that we've got?
Absolutely. Next question.
James Fosley's back from Minneapolis. Do cues get fired by the soundboard, the lightboard, or someone on stage?
Go ahead, Matt.
Ever popular, it depends.
It's our favorite term here, so it's good.
Normally most of the automation, like the turntables, slip stages, the trapdoor, that's run by a automation crew member on stage, operating the equipment. And then speaking to safety, there's an e-stop button or multiple ones in places where ASM has view of the stage and can see there's an issue. With the trapdoors, we have overhead cameras. So you can see if someone's standing on the trapdoor, if there's an issue, and we use infrared cameras. But there are like electrical things that'll get triggered by the light board. So if there's something that's just triggering a solenoid to release a drop, that'll get programmed into the light board with an inhibited fader set up as a safety. So when you're doing light check and you're stepping through the lights, you don't accidentally trigger that and have the piece of scenery fall on you.
Always good. Go ahead, Mike.
I think there's a path in there where, if we were trying to incorporate and tightly incorporate multiple elements together, then we have to have some way to execute cues at the same time, right? From a single go button. And that could be show control from some master show control, or it could be taken from, from one of the devices in there. I think if you're driving some physical motion on stage, right? If the automation system is running some real thing, that we have to have an operator who is ready to be there. And ideally, we're going to have that operator have some levels of safety, like holding a hold to run button, to make sure that everything is actually in the right state and safe to go. And continuing on to that, Matt, as you said, right, e-stops throughout the building, right? It's not an automation system if there isn't an e-stop. So we need to be able to control all of those bits and pieces to make that happen, right?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry. I think the answer to that question, a follow-up with Mike, is that yes, there is in general a person with, at least a hold the run button in these systems. I'm finding that there's a larger desire in the industry to have these other systems, whether it's the soundboard or the light board, or any other external set point to drive stage automation. And that's where I was talking about dynamic automation, where the set point is set not by the system pre-programmed in. It is fluid and can change based on the input from the other system. So for instance, the chandelier in Vegas, and I can't remember the name of the club, Omni maybe, where the chandelier's lights and motion are all driven by the DJ's control board, right? They are what the DJ is doing on their mixer, both tempo and sound and all of that is actually feeding into and driving the stage automation system in a way that isn't the same any night, right? It is different every time somebody goes up to that console. And these type of applications in stage automation are those cases where I find very exciting and kind of where the industry can go from here, but do require a higher end understanding of functional safety beyond an emergency stop, right? Emergency stops are great, and are a necessity in any stage automation system. But for a lot of things where you don't have as close containment on the parameters of where it will be, what you're telling it to do, you're going to need other things that limit the speed safely, limit the direction, limit the acceleration, specifically if you're dealing with phone performers, to a safe level based on industry standards.
Next question.
David Brady in New York City is this one. With all due respect to stage automation in theaters, what are the constraints and concerns of taking a show on the road a la Rammstein or Peter Gabriel's stage shows?
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
More trucks. I think what you do is you build your show to fit into as many trucks as you can afford, in order so that you don't have to rely on the venue that you're going to provide anything, right? You need this to sort of come with you, and then you need to have your technicians come with you. I know a friend of mine is the automation technician on one of the 5 or 6 Hamilton tours, and I think one of the trucks is the automation truck. It just comes with all of their stuff and all of their tools and their desks and their things that they need to have to work with. They sit down, they drop in, and it also has to be advanced. So if the Peter Gabriel tour is going to a show, there are a team of people who are looking at power, who are looking at structure, who are making sure that you're not going to be overloading the actual building, and things are not going to fall because you've put a lot more weight on it than it's used to. And this sort of thing does happen. The automation at the Met for a show about 5 or 6 years back, they had to rebuild the building in order to make it to have it sustain the kind of weight that was getting put on there for the sake of theatrical automation. So just advance, have enough trucks, and have all your equipment with you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, advance, but more trucks also means more stuff, right? You're not just like walking in with some people. You're walking in with, maybe you're touring with 2 complete show decks or 2 complete overhead truss structures, so that advance is piggybacking on each other as it's running around. So you're performing one night and you're setting up in another city for the 2 or 3 nights ahead of you.
I was talking to a lighting designer, does some pretty big shows, and he was showing me this really great lighting rig, and he goes, and it all fits into one truck. it was like the way it was designed was, it's 8 feet wide. I think it was 8 feet wide or 7.5 feet wide, whatever it is, but it all fits. This whole lighting thing that goes across the top all fits into one truck. And I realized like how much of that conversation is part of the design is not just being able to do it, but being able to ship it. Yeah. Next question.
Kyle Hammond is back with us from Chicago. What is the tool you wish you could snap your fingers and have to support a project you're currently working on?
Go ahead, Slalek.
Really affordable and within the budget that I'm working on, but small winches that would allow us to move up and down some chandeliers that we have in the show. Because right now we're in a space where we have to build a full proscenium out of truss. We don't have a line set system, and it would be great to just pull those chandeliers in and out and not have them have to be there as a unit set for the entire show. Definitely want to have.
Next question.
Chadwick Engelman in West Carrollton, looks like. Why are the automation companies not allowing end users to mix and match equipment for specific needs? There are several theaters with 2 completely separate automation systems, one to control the scenery automation and one to control the line set winch.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem that I've seen as well. The reason that they don't do it is that each of these systems runs on its own proprietary internal software package, right? Whether it is StageTech or ZFX or Creative Connors, they're all running their own internal software, which has its own differences in how it handles parameters like velocity and acceleration, and that there is not a set protocol to communicate across these systems yet. We have been working on moving that needle along slowly in the ESTA technical standards program, which I'll plug here. Is the standards are all free for our industry, and the technical standards program does standards both with stage automation, but as well with stage lighting and power. There's a movement to kind of to start the conversations in that direction. The big questions deal with safety, right? If you're having 2 different systems controlling the set point of a motion system, right? The communication between them, who is handling the safety interaction between them, and is one system stopping both, or can either system stop? And then how do you come back out of that? So it's not impossible, right? There are ways to get around it. It's just not. When these systems are put into place, historically that hasn't been a consideration in the process to kind of make that possibility happen.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Just a tag on there, especially on like the line sets and the permanently installed equipment. that's all, these are two completely divorced ideas about how to approach putting control systems in, right? Like, theater consultants and architects are the ones specifying the line sets and the control point and the control system, with no real approach or approach to what the production is going to need. The parameters that they're designing to don't necessarily, they are there to support the productions, but they aren't there to go hand in hand with those productions. And I think that's why we end up with two completely different systems to control these, permanently installed pieces of equipment and then the production automation.
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
Yeah, I think that brings up for me, one of your folks there at Creative Connors, Mike, is Brian Fosca, who worked for many, many years at the Seattle Repertory Theater, and I know that they had a bunch of stuff, motors and linear actuators and all that as sort of part of their inventory that they can put together for any particular need over the course of many designs. And so that's what I hope for the industry as a lighting designer, as a theatrical designer, is can I go into a regional theater or an opera that has these building blocks to do something that is an idea that is built in my head. So it's not a giant lift for me to say, I would really love it if this wall moved from stage left to stage right over the course of this time. But I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if we have the people. I don't know if we have the stuff. And the theater to say, well, yeah, we have the stuff, and here's how it could happen, and let's do it. So that's what I hope for is for those theaters to have those building blocks so that we can. And those building blocks are often from disparate companies. If the theater can work together to build and have and work with these things, it's a lot more likely for us to do some amazing things in those spaces.
You go with Dan.
I just want to tag on that. I think that comes down to the system that was just being discussed at the early stages, that being part of the parameters, right? When you put out the spec, I need our stage automation system to be able to add in other things along the way, right? Oftentimes when a company is putting in a line set array for a theater, right, they're using a very simple touch interface, or regardless of the interface, they're not considering, can this system also control these other things, right? When you're putting a spec together for a building, or when you're redoing the automation system in the space, considering and talking about how are we going to be able to move this along and have these other pieces incorporated is an important part of it.
Next question.
Tlaloc from Brevard, North Carolina, who has passed us in at 4 o'clock this morning. How do you adjust for slippage when dealing with a tire-driven turntable?
Go ahead, Matt.
The turntable system we've got has an encoder wheel that rides along the surface of the turntable, and so it can provide feedback to the motion control computer that, okay, the tire's moving, but the set's not moving.
Right. Do you ever have multiple encoders to cross-check them?
The system we've got only has it was only set up with a singular encoder the way we've configured it.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think, Matt, that dancer wheel encoder, as long as it's not actually taking that, as long as you're not taking the position from the drive wheel, it's not a friction drive, you're guaranteed to have some slippage. No matter how it goes, no matter how good it is, there's going to be some. And that can pretty quickly compound and get you to not be aligned and not be where you're at. You can also pull that position from the center. If you've got a big enough center pivot, and you've got maybe a big gear in there, to reduce and eliminate any concern about slipping or any issues with the drive surface or the drive edge where you're reading that position from.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What is the weight limit of the circular stages that Matt does?
Go ahead, Matt.
So I'm haven't dealt with the construction on it, but there's a lot of weight that's on there. So you've got, up to 20 cast members on the stage whilst rotating, plus essentially 2 buildings. And on the hero set, and then on Beatsville, same thing. You've got 20 people. You've got a drum kit. You've got the scenery. You've got dimmers underneath the floor, and so it's heavy duty casters. And that's why I was bringing up the having tires at the opposite end of the drive tire, because to create an amount of friction to get the traction, the extra weight will cause slippage.
Right. And there's really, it's just a matter, it's a function of, with any of these turntables, it's a function of just how you structure it. But it theoretically, I mean, I've seen turntables that turn whole tractor trailer trucks, that are there. So you can build them, right? It's just a matter of speccing, because a lot of these you're building pretty much to spec, right? You're not.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going out and buying something. You're building it based on the requirements for the show.
Yeah. Every turntable is a different size. So we had one this season that was a smaller diameter, and the musicals we set up and for the 2 months that it's up, and it sits there. When we're in season doing straight plays, we do rotating reps. So we'll have one show in the afternoon, other show in the evening. So this season we were setting up and striking the turntable, for every performance that it used that bit of scenery.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think the weight limit on a revolving stage is, I mean, it's like, it is dependent on so many factors, right? I mean, Matt mentioned, heavy duty casters, right? Casters underneath that platform is rolling on will dramatically affect the performance of that stage, right? And, if the casters are too soft, you'll end up not being able to spin it. If they're swivel casters, you may not be able to actually change direction. And kind of depends on also the horsepower of the motor that's there, the diameter of the turntable, the diameter of the drive wheel. And, as Matt, I don't know if you've ever bumped into this, but we have just started adding extra motors to the outside of the turntable as we get larger diameter and bigger and heavier loads on there, in order to get it to spin and to make sure that we're keeping that performance correct and good for everybody.
Next question.
Marty Atias in Maryland. For Matt, how does the system detect Alice's hand gestures in the example you gave earlier? Is there any similarity to musician Imogen Heap's MIDI controller gloves?
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I took this one because it's based on Alice. So I was assuming it was for me instead of Matt. So the Alice system uses the Microsoft Kinect sensors. So we use the ones for Windows, but there are also the ones for the Xbox system. They don't necessarily, they allow the performer to move as they would normally do. Since it's a camera, using depth of field, the motion of the performer isn't limited by the glove, so they can be gloveless. So it isn't like the MIDI controller gloves that are here, which would require some feedback, because the intention is to have the actor appear as much in costume as they would normally. The system uses joint tracking and hand closures to do all of the movements. So it tracks, I can't remember the exact number now, but 37 different points of the human body, and it transmits all of that data to the main system in distances of millimeters in both the X, Y, and Z axis off of that. So it uses the camera data rather than any kind of physical mechanical sensor.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. If moving hundreds or thousands of pounds of scenery, props, and people means forces that can injure or kill, what might be some tips for actors to help them decide if it's a safe set?
Go ahead, Swallow.
There's oftentimes at the beginning of a technical rehearsal period a set walkthrough, and you're going to have essentially a meeting with the automation technicians, with the technical director, with the stage manager. And you want to just pay a lot of attention in those moments and sort of walk through with them and kind of understand how it all works and get an overview of it. And if there's anything that feels to you like it might not be quite right, ask and have that conversation, because you might be wrong and you might be right. And so be active and be proactive in those meetings and make sure that those meetings are happening. If you have a show with automation, request and require that meeting.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman, Brevard, what is the Creative Connors product lineup and philosophy?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think our philosophy is to start there. Our philosophy is to make automation accessible to as many people as possible. And so we are providing building blocks for making these effects happen in your theater, whether it's a deck winch or a curtain track or some hoist of some kind or a stage lift. All those pieces kind of come together in a plug and play setup. So the machines, the controllers, the e-stop system, and the control software. And our hope there is that we can also, make, again, kind of with the accessibility, make your show happen the way you want it to, whether it's running just the automation or integrating and incorporating with sound and lights to create these, hopefully spectacular moments.
Mike, Dan, Matt, Tlaloc, thank you so much for your time. Like, just a great hour. I know I've about multiplied my knowledge of how automation works, which is still very small, by about 100. So thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we'll get you guys to come back sometime after we've absorbed some of it and seen some more of it in the real world. So thank you again for coming and joining us this morning. And thank you to the producers who asked all the great questions. So we didn't come up with any of these questions. The producers watch this. They're watching and they're all asking these questions throughout the show. So thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you to the panelists for both the first hour and the second hour. We can't do this without you. And it was a great day of questions there. And thank you to the incredible team on the back end. This show takes somewhere between 15 and 30 people to launch every single day, 7 days a week. There's people that are planning it. There's people who are doing the development work, the automation work that we have here. It's a little bit less physical, more virtual, but we have a full automation system here that people are building and constantly working on. The people on the back end that are cutting the show and managing the questions and managing all the other aspects that make this show work. So we really appreciate all of your work. The Tlaloc Traversal, we traveled 88,000 miles, 142,000 kilometers today, answering these questions. And that's more than 700 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. That's great.
Cool show.
That's very cool show. Yeah. I'm going to go back to animating my office. Let's see if the lights will turn off.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, guys. It's really, really awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Fantastic hour. All right, I'm going to jump.